Our first session is the ORCID Consortium and integration at user facilities. And I'm going to get off the screen here.
Great.
We'll hear from Carly Robinson, the Assistant Director for Information Products and Services at the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Scientific and Technical Information, OSTI. And I want to point out that she led the project to reinvent OSTI.gov as the primary search tool for Department of Energy R&D results. And that is a resource that everyone on this webinar should be aware of. Definitely check out OSTI.gov. We also have with us Jackie Flood. She's the lead master user agreement specialist for Argonne National Laboratory, where she is in charge of the ORCID implementation for the user registration process, as well as future ORCID implementations, which she will describe. So thank you both for joining us this morning. And Carly, please tell us more about the ORCID Consortium, and I will step back and give you the audience.
Great. Thank you so much. I will share my screen. Does that look good to you all?
Yes, that looks right.
Okay, perfect. Well, it is wonderful to be back at SURF. I think this is my third or fourth SURF meeting, so really appreciate being able to provide an update on the U.S. government ORCID Consortium. And honestly, we kind of go back, our roots started at a SURF meeting a number of years ago. This idea that, there were a number of DOE and US government organizations that were joining ORCID as direct members. A lot of the user facilities or national labs were becoming ORCID members to be able to kind of utilize the services that ORCID provide around, having a persistent identifier for an individual. And there was a lot of interest from those organizations, from ORCID, and also DOE about creating a consortium membership that would allow DOE affiliated organizations and also US government organizations to become ORCID members through a consortium. And that conversation started at a SURF meeting and kind of led to the development of the US government ORCID Consortium that we wanted to really create a community around this space to also help decrease costs and provide increased services. And so the US government ORCID Consortium was launched April 1st of 2020, and it is led by my office, the DOE Office of Scientific and Technical Information, or OSTI. So we see a number of benefits to becoming an ORCID member through a consortium. You get the consortium, or I should say the ORCID premium member benefits. So you get 5 API credentials you can use to integrate within multiple systems. There's increased API functionality, custom analytics. There's a lot of benefits that come kind of from the ORCID side of things. But from the consortium side of things, we can also provide more individualized support, both on the administrative side and also on the technical side. And then one of the great benefits that we see is that all consortium members are part of the US government community of practice. So we really wanted to create this community around using ORCID IDs, integrating with the ORCID APIs to discuss and share information with similar needs, similar use cases. And so when we launched the consortium in 2020, we started with 6 members, and that has grown to 16 over a little over a year and a half, which is really exciting. We started with primarily DOE affiliated organizations, but that has broadened to include other US federal agencies. So for example, NASA, USDA, CDC, FDA, and most recently EPA have all joined the consortium. And then on the DOE side, my office, OSTI, is a member, as well as Princeton Plasma Physics Lab, Oak Ridge National Lab, Berkeley National Lab, Brookhaven National Lab, Los Alamos, Pacific Northwest National Lab, and 4 organizations within Argonne National Lab. So the Advanced Photon Source, the Leadership Computing Facility, the Research Library, and the Center for Nanoscale Materials. And so you'll see a couple of user facilities that kind of joined the consortium directly and separately at Argonne. There are also a number of facilities that are using the lab membership. So for example, at Oak Ridge National Lab, SNS and Heifer use that membership for ORCID integrations, and that is similar across the DOE National Labs. So, we expect even more growth in the membership, which is really exciting. And also, the more members we have, the cheaper it is to become an ORCID member. So it's really great to see that as well. Once we get to 20 members, there's kind of a decrease in cost for everyone. So that's great. And that comes from the ORCID side of things and how they charge their membership fees. So I had mentioned, creating this community and really having a community of practice. And, we wanted to be able to regularly bring folks together to share ORCID API integration details, share best practices, use cases, also discuss challenges or, anything that has arisen that maybe wasn't expected, or questions, things like that. Also just generally raise ORCID awareness. I think there is a growing awareness, which is really wonderful, but there are still a lot of questions out there. To identify potential collaborations, and also for us to get feedback on the consortium and how we can better serve the community. So because the consortium membership is broad, it includes federal agencies, national laboratories, program offices, libraries, scientific and technical information offices, and user facilities. We have a very broad range of community members from those organizations as well. So facility managers, developers, librarians, scientific and technical information officers, program managers, evaluation coordinators. It's really wonderful to kind of bring all of these folks together regularly. And we do that through our every other month community calls. So we host community calls the second Wednesday of every other month at 2 p.m. Typically, these calls include updates about ORCID services, updates about the consortium, and then we really encourage our consortium members to present at the meetings, about their ORCID integrations or their future plans, or kind of any challenges or questions that come up. So that has been really wonderful. We do record all these presentations, and those are available for our community members. So for example, if we have a new organization that joins as a member, they will have access to kind of all of those previous community calls if they're interested. We also, try to make sure that there is time for discussion or to raise any questions that come up. We use a tool called Mentimeter, which has been really helpful to spur discussion. We can ask some guided questions and get folks to share a little bit more. So that has been great. And so far, I think it's going well. Jackie, who will be speaking next, she could let us know. But it's another line of communication that is opened up, outside of emails and the regular calls that we have with our members. We can get quick community feedback, which is really wonderful. We have about 30 participants on average per call, and there's a lot of active discussion. And, in the future, we've had some trainings during the training so far during the community call, but we expect to have, future webinars, trainings. Hopefully at some point we can get back together in person, and would love to have a workshop. We also develop community specific resources. So we've developed a couple of those for our members so far, but we'll continue to do so. If any of you were on the SSURF webinar on ORCID earlier this year, you've already seen this slide, but I thought it was helpful to include again. So there are a number of use cases that organizations can implement when they want to use ORCID IDs. So I'll focus particularly on kind of user facilities in this context, but funding offices, agency library organizations, for portfolio analysis. There are so many kind of use cases for implementation. But on the user facility side, some of the things that you could do with ORCID membership is to collect and authenticate ORCID IDs in facility management systems to associate with the researchers or your users, require or accepted ORCID IDs with facility use applications, connect facility management systems to populate applications with ORCID record information, which could potentially help reduce burden, or connect into kind of your management systems that might already have that information. You could also push facility use or awards into ORCID records, push review recognition to ORCID records, use the works in ORCID records to hopefully help understand facility use or impact, and also pull information from ORCID records for reporting to funders. And so, we're having a lot of conversations about all of these use cases. Some of them are already being implemented by some of the facilities, and you'll hear more about that next from Jackie. But I think there is a lot that can be done that we discuss in our community. And so just to highlight a couple of specific use cases that are already kind of happening with our members, we have 17 member API integrations. So we only have 16 members. That means a couple of our members are using more than one API to kind of integrate with different systems. But of those 17 integrations, starting with user facilities, they're collecting and requiring authenticated ORCID IDs with proposals, pushing facility use into the ORCID resource section of the ORCID record. Facilities are pushing peer review in ORCID membership and service section. Federal scientific and information technology organizations are pushing research outputs into the ORCID work section. Agencies and national labs are collecting authenticated ORCID IDs in their publication management systems. Some of the labs are using the affiliation manager to push, affiliation information into ORCID employment section. And national labs are connecting authenticated ORCID IDs within lab profile systems. And it is possible that I missed some of the integrations, but there's a lot that's going on in this space. And the last thing that I wanted to highlight before turning it over to Jackie was a national security memo that came out in January of this year. Again, if you happen to have caught the webinar, we mentioned this, and it is potentially related to ORCID IDs. So this memo is on supported research and development national security policy. So generally, it focuses on strengthening protections of U.S. government supported R&D against foreign government interference and exploitation. So it is a very broad memo, and there is just kind of one small piece that is kind of related to this particular conversation. And that said that federal agencies shall establish policies regarding requirements for individual researchers supported by or working on any federal research grant to be registered with a service that provides a digital persistent identifier for that individual. So ORCID or ORCID IDs are persistent identifiers for individuals. And so ORCID IDs could be used by federal agencies to implement this memo. And really, I'll just speak for myself. I don't really see many alternatives out there. So it is possible that a number of agencies might be using ORCID IDs to implement this policy. One other thing that I wanted to highlight on this memo, so that came out under the last administration in the last few days in kind of mid-January, but this administration, the current administration, is also supportive. So Dr. Eric Lander, who is the director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, or OSTP, he put out a blog post in August that talked about the Biden-Harris administration holding a strong commitment to protecting research security and maintaining the core values behind America's scientific leadership, including openness, transparency, honesty, equity, fair competition, objectivity, and democratic values. And over the next 90 days, OSTP will be developing clear and effective implementation guidance for the NSPM 33 memo, working in close partnership with the national security staff, cabinet agencies, and other federal agencies through the National Science and Technology Council, or NSTC. So this guidance is being worked on and hopefully will be released very, very soon. The guidance will address 3 major areas that were outlined in that blog post. Disclosure policy, which will include guidance on digital persistent identifiers for researchers, oversight and enforcement, and research security programs. So with that, that was my last slide. I did see something in the chat. I don't know if that was a question for me, but Dan, I didn't know if you wanted to take questions now or wait until after Jackie presents.
Hi everyone, this is Dan. Let's wait until after Jackie's presented, and then as people reflect on what they've heard, we'll check the chat function and I'll moderate any comments that way.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Carly. Over to you, Jackie.
All right. Share setup here. All right. There we go. How does that look?
Great.
Yeah, that looks good.
Okay, perfect. So I am Jackie Flood. I work at the Advanced Photon Source User Office. We were one of the first of the 5, I think, consortium members, right? Happy to get on board with Carly and the team to implement ORCID. I started off at the user office about 4 years ago, doing site access administration and user registration, then quickly went into the lead in the Argonne user agreements for the lab, and more recently have been transferred into the Dept administration role, working on administering proposals, UPS administrative team, and then of course I'm the ORCID implementation SME in our office, which is why I'm here today talking to everybody. So Argonne has 4 different memberships, and with that APS and CNM are somewhat combined. So as many of you probably know, users, when they register with either APS or CNM, it is one joint registration form, which is why we had to dive into the process of dual authentication for ORCID authentication. I'm going to go through a quick demo of the registration form so everybody kind of gets a flavor of what that looks like. So when a user comes to our facility and they decide that they want to use either the APS or the Center for Nanoscale Materials, they click these radio buttons within our registration. Like I said, it is one registration form for both facilities. So users can do either facility or both. So in this case, this is going to be a little demo of somebody that's coming to conduct work at both of our facilities. These radio buttons trigger the authentication process that will follow. Whoops, there we go. So once the user chooses the facility that they are coming to work at, they scroll down the registration form and they come to the authorization section. This link here goes directly into the ORCID site. So a user who may be unfamiliar can read a little bit about ORCID identifiers. And it also states that these are required in order to register. The user then clicks the radio button, which will automatically direct them to the following screen, where they can either sign into their ORCID to authenticate or sign up if they don't already have one. And as you see down here, it says, if you don't already have an ORCID, register now. By clicking this link, it will direct you to the ORCID sign up section. So as soon as the user either signs in or fully signs up for ORCID, they are then directed to the authentication page. And since the APS and CNM have big plans for implementation with ORCID across the board with many of our systems, we're automatically asking the user to grant us full access to their record. So we are advising them here that by adding Advanced Photon Source as a trusted party, we will be able to update information about them as a user, about their research activities, and that we will be set as a trusted organization in their ORCID record. So they authorize access and then are directed to a page that thanks them for authorizing APS to read and update their ORCID, and to click here to then authorize the CNM. So once they click here, they are then brought to that same authentication page, but this time for the Center for Nanoscale Materials instead of the Advanced Photon Source. Once they authorize the CNM, they are then brought to this landing page where they can instantly return right back to the registration, so they can finish filling out the registration form in order to come to the facility. Once they get back into the registration, this ID box will appear and automatically populate their ORCID ID. We specifically chose to leave this ID box out of the form until it is populated to avoid confusion. The user cannot go back in and edit any of the numbers here. We did that specifically to make sure that our data that we are collecting is accurate and that we are actually receiving the full authentication. We did feel like if it was left blank and open for someone to free type in, we would miss that point of authentication. So we actually need the user to go in and talk to ORCID and click authorize so that the proper accesses are granted through our systems. And if the form was filled out here automatically by a user, like not automatically keyed in by hand, we would skip that piece and we would maybe get their ORCID ID, but we wouldn't be able to connect to their actual record in order to communicate back and forth with it. So after the user authenticates, they can go ahead and then finish filling out the registration form, which I will spare you from because it's lengthy. And then we switch tables and go to the user administrative side of things. So the APS user office team goes into the registration on the admin side of things and reviews and approves the user's registration. Once the admin approves the registration, the user's ID is collected in our APS data warehouse, where it shows which institution was authenticated. In this case, it was both APS and CNM, and it fills in the user ORCID automatically. It's a quick and easy process. We've had really no major issues behind the scenes with this, so it's worked out wonderfully. And right here is just a quick overview of the workflow. So the user starts with the registration, calls to ORCID to get an authentication authorization code, and returns the code to the APS ORCID program. The ORCID program then calls back to ORCID to get the ORCID data with the authorization code. And then in turn, ORCID returns ORCID data that includes the actual ORCID, the access token, the username, and additional information. APS and ORCID then passes that information and access token back to the user registration form, where it is then stored in our user database behind the scenes for reporting and other resources. So the APS ORCID policy is that we do require ORCID authentication of either APS or CNM facility as a trusted party in order for a user to submit their registration form. So if they decide to skip it and they scroll down to the bottom and try to submit, they'll get an error. It brings them right back up to the section that they missed. It says, hey, you forgot to authenticate us. Please go ahead and complete this step so that you can submit your registration. And with that, we've had no pushback from users and very few questions. Most of the time, questions come with maybe a screen not populating properly, or if there's a hiccup in the system. But users seem very, very eager to allow APS and or CNM into their ORCID, which I think just really helps the community as a whole to share information, which is the point of this in the first place. The nice thing about it is that record holders still control their ORCID record. So if at any time they decide, I'm no longer going to be working at the CNM and I have no need for them to be a part of my record, they can go into their ORCID and remove the trusted organization at any time. So it is still all in the record holder's control to determine who they want as a trusted party on their ORCID. So during our implementation, we did have a little bit of a communication plan that we'll share in case other facilities are wondering how we came about this. But the day we went live in registration, we sent out an initial email to the user community, the broad user community at Argonne and APS and CNM, advising that we have now launched ORCID in our user registration. This communication had an overview of the benefits of ORCID. It had a link to our mini registration, which I will touch on in a few minutes. It also had a link to the ORCID homepage for users who might not have been aware of what ORCID is, as well as a link to the ORCID library of videos, which has just a wealth of information for anybody who wanted to dive in and see more of what ORCID can do. So after that initial communication went out, we then launched the mini registration communication, which was sent out monthly after the initial launch. So I'll quickly show you what that looks like. So as you know, users get site access and access for user facilities, and they have a potential of having a full 2 year of site access without having to renew any of their information. So our thought here was we want to capture ORCID records for this audience of users that falls into this bucket. So they may be registered 3 weeks before we launched ORCID, but we still want to be able to connect to their ORCID before their 2 years is up and they register again. So every month we sent out the link to this mini registration, which you can see what it looks like at the bottom of the page here, so that the user didn't have to fill out. I just keep clicking buttons. So the user doesn't have to fill out the full registration form. They can simply authenticate either the APS or the CNM in a short form. So the user clicks on the link, they sign in with their ANL credentials, and they can decide whether they're authenticating APS or CNM. And then they click here to authenticate. Once they click this button here, they're then brought to those authentication pages where they can either sign in or sign up for ORCID, submit and authenticate. So it's a nice and simple form for all those users who fall into this special bucket of site access. And now the fun part for our plan for the future. We're really hoping to implement ORCID widely across the APS systems. Something new that came across our plate lately is using ORCID for the universal proposal system. This is still in early stages, so it's kind of just talk right now, but there are 3 labs that are participating in this UPS process. And we are talking with our programming team about using ORCIDs for the sign-on credentials. Since each lab has their own set of credentials for their own users, if all 3 are using the same proposal system, we need a consistent form of signing on. It can't be just one lab's credentials versus the others. So we think ORCID would fall perfectly into this category and tick all the boxes of what we need in order to use them as sign-on credentials. We also hope to soon be able to start working on uploading APS service awards to ORCID. So that would mean awarded beam time, service to different committees like the user organization, partner user council, scientific advisory committee, and the peer review panels, just to name a few. We're also planning to integrate ORCID with the APS and Argonne publication systems and connect them to NSF, funding identifiers. And we've had communications with NSF already to discuss this. There's a lot of work to do here, but I think both parties are very interested in proceeding with ORCID. So we should see some awesome things to come in the future in that area. And then we want to connect ORCID with our beamline with equipment and instruments, beamlines, techniques, and proposals. And it'll just be a really exciting and easy way to share this information and help the user community to show the efforts they have and the work that they've done in an easier way with less handwork. So we're really excited to continue with this process. And as Carly had mentioned earlier, those OSCE community calls are extremely beneficial. There's tons of information that we gain from it. We have all of the presentations saved for reference, and it's a really, really great way to network with other community members that might be in the same boat that you are, might be a little bit further along in their process, so that you have this instant networking opportunity to learn from those who've already done what you're trying to do, or to help teach those who are trying to get to where you are. So it's opened up a lot of opportunities for the APS user office to be able to share what we've done so far. So it's been a really great experience, and we're really, really happy to be a part of it. And that is the ORCID implementation at the APS.
All right. Thank you very much. That was some great detail, and to see what you have in mind for the future, Jackie, is really, I think, inspiring perhaps, and will inform some other facilities on what they might possibly be able to consider. I wonder, Carly, first, if there was anything Jackie had mentioned that you would have a response to.
I think she covered it well. Thanks.
All right. Then also behind the scenes here, one of our attendees is Shawna Sadler with Orchid, and I've asked if she would like to step into the conversation and really react to what she's just heard both of you describing. And actually, before you get started, Shawna, I'll be the first to announce to this audience that Shawna is one of the newly elected board members for SSURF, and she will be part of the quick intro to the new board members session that we have later this afternoon. But appreciate your interest, of course, and deep, consistent involvement with SSURF. And a thank you and a congratulations for being elected to the board. But also, relative to this conversation right now, what do you think we should also know from your perspective?
Hi, everybody, and thank you. Yes, I'm so pleased to be part of the SSURF community, and I work with research communities around the world, and I just find the work that the members of SSURF are doing is just so innovative, and it's so energizing to work with this community. So I really appreciate it, and the adoption of ORCID, and that all we have to offer, and APS and all of you are just really optimizing everything ORCID has to offer, and we really appreciate it. And you're leading the way, and you're a global example, and we're just so appreciative. Hopefully over this next maybe week or two, we'll have some good news, and we'll be able to further more work together. And we're just so excited, and the whole ORCID organization is just really focused and keen to meet your needs. So thank you for having me, really appreciate it. And thank you for your adoption. And of course to Carly and Jackie for being such great representatives and just helping ORCID really meet your needs. All right, I'll stop there. Thanks, everybody.
Great, thank you, Shawna. All right, then I had a question back to you, Carly. I was curious if there's a particular realm of new stakeholders for the consortium that you're looking to attract, and in some ways how that outreach, how does that happen? And I have a little bit of vested interest. I'm curious to know how you're making those efforts, because that would become something that SSURF and an audience like we have today would be the right group to be describing this to.
Sure, yeah. So our consortium members, we do limit it to those within the US government or kind of directly affiliated with the US government. And so that can be, US government kind of user facilities, things like that. It can be US government federal agencies, it can be program offices, but we do kind of focus specifically on the US government context. Folks outside of that community can either join ORCID directly, or there is actually another US consortium where a lot of universities are members through that consortium. And so the US is a little unique, I think, in that we have two consortia focused, one primarily more on the university space and some of the private funders. And then we have our consortium, which is focused more on the US government space. So we really are very open to kind of membership in that space. We try to give presentations like this to let folks know that we are out out there and available, and would love to have new members, and would very much welcome kind of anyone in that community.
All right. I'm just checking through, see if there's any other questions from people here. If anyone in the audience is willing to share how ORCID is working at their facility, or think of this even as a troubleshooting type of opportunity to say, but there's a glitch or somehow this isn't working, and Carly is on the phone, or on the screen, I should ask her about this. While people are considering that, let me also ask Carly, you may have seen in our agenda later today during the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in User Facilities panel, Dr. Jorg Heber from Berkeley is going to be describing the name change initiative. I wonder if you're familiar with that, and if that overlaps or how that really bumps into sort of the realm of ORCID.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I am familiar with the initiative. It's really wonderful that you all will be talking about that as well. And this could actually be more of a question directly for Shawna from the ORCID perspective. But my understanding is that because within your ORCID record, you as kind of the researcher or the record holder gets to decide what information is in your ORCID record. That you can change the name, and you can have aliases if you'd like, previous names or variations of your names. But I'll turn it over to Shawna maybe to expand on that.
Sure, Carly, everything you said was dead on, really perfect. So thank you. And just to build off what you said, ORCID, the record, what's really important to ORCID is that we're a researcher first organization. So the record contains what the researcher wants it to contain. And, the researcher decides what name and what previous names are listed. We don't ask for gender either. That's not part of the record. There's no personal information. It's strictly about your research activities. So, and with the Berkeley initiative, we have put up our hand and, and offered to be part of this initiative because we are so appreciative, and we really do want to support the DEI initiatives and support researchers. Really, that's our whole goal, is to really support the researchers. So, so we're thrilled this initiative is happening, and we're happy to be part of it.
All right. Well, thanks for giving us a little bit of that context, and also maybe a foreshadowing or a prompt for the audience to join that panel or join that session later today. And then, Jackie, I wanted to turn the question to you, if I could. In taking some of the notes there, I wondered, in the realm of, think of it as technology glitch or cybersecurity issues, if you've found that users have challenges operating within the system because of the type of either browser or laptop or just other types of firewall and cybersecurity settings that they have, and how you deal with that.
Sure. Honestly, most of the time it is an issue of rushing and not reading a screen. So the user clicks a submit before they're supposed to click here to authenticate. So they're just skipping a small step. The programming was set up so that if for whatever reason there was an issue behind the scenes with either systems, ORCID or APSs, the user can come back into their registration and clear ORCID. It was on one of the screen share items that I had shared where we clicked to authenticate. There is a button at the bottom that clears anything that had previously been done in case that did happen. Every once in a while, we'll receive a question from a user saying, we're stuck here, and then we have to clear it on our end and ask them to start over again. Nothing that happens on a daily basis. I would say now that it's been implemented for, almost a year, I get one every 2 to 3 months. So systems on both ends are working appropriately, and we couldn't be happier with the way that it's kind of turning out.
All right, good to hear. That smoothness is not always the way in dealing with different federal protocols. All right. Well, I'm not seeing that there's any questions here, and I want to thank you for your time this morning and that deep overview. You might have shown it at the end, but I wonder if you could, at the end of your presentations, but I wonder if you could each remark on how people could reach you, either a website or a specific email address, if they have further questions?
Absolutely. Would it be helpful?
Carly, I'll start with you.
Well, I was going to say, would it be helpful to throw it in the chat for folks? Would that be helpful?
Yes, actually, if you'd like to do that.
Okay. Yeah, I'll throw a website and email address in the chat, but it's OSCI.gov, and we have an ORCID Consortium at OSCI.gov email address.
All right. Yes, and OSCI.gov, as I said at the beginning, definitely a resource for everyone to check out.
And my personal email, I will be happy to share, as well as the APS user office email that'll go to our main inquiries box. So any questions come there can then be fielded to the appropriate contacts for the APS.
Okay. Thanks for putting that into the chat then. And we appreciate your time. Thank you, everyone in the audience, taking some time. And in about 10 minutes, we will be starting our next session with Barbara Helland, who will be describing the COVID-19 High Performance Computing Consortium. And I look forward to seeing you on there if you have the time to join. And thanks again, everyone, for your support and engagement with SURF. Let's leave this up for just a minute or so if people are looking to click your email addresses in those other links.